have a VOD review here today. So we're going to be looking at RGB Andre's game, I believe. It's the username. And we won the draw, or won the coin flip. So we get to go first, and let's just go ahead and get right into it. Okay, easy
No
mulligan.
lands, so no choice but to mulligan. So here I think no red force, but I feel like it's too risky to mulligan to 5 against unknown opponents. If it's a scam, we're screwed. So we have a bobble and a preordained, so I think I kept here.
So I agree with keeping. The question is, what card are we putting back here? I think there's basically two options. Option number one, I would definitely consider putting back the DRC. The thing is, we're going to preordain on turn 2. We're very likely going to want a counter spell, which means the DRC is not very likely to be deployed until turn 3, which can still be fine. But also, when you consider our plan might just be Murktide Regent here, and then having Counterspell to back that up can be really nice. We want maximum looks at those lands, so I think that the Prudent and Bauble are too important to put back. The other option is put back the second Counterspell, in my opinion. Um, we could like set up Counterspell turn 2, DRC, Murktide, something turn 3, depending on what we draw. That's also a possibility. I mean, DRC is really great. It's okay to play DRC on turn 3, but just, I guess the question is, do we want to have the DRC along with the Murktide when we don't get to get the DRC down before we cast the Prudent and Bauble, right? Because then it just makes our whole curve kind of awkward. So I think I lean towards putting back DRC, but Counterspell also seems defensible. Murktide, I'm pretty sure I'd hold on to here. It's a great card when you're lower on cards, just because it's such a single card powerhouse. So I'm usually pretty happy to have Murktide in any of my mulligan hands, or play towards that plan if you can. Which this hand does play towards it with the Preordain, Bauble, Counterspell, I think. Yep. And then, yeah, so let's see. We put back a Counterspell. Fair enough. I think that's defensible.
So
Oh, so, okay, so here we cast Preordain. This is interesting to me. There's two ways to think of this, right? We're obviously looking for the second land. Preordain has 3 looks for it, and we could hit the second land and then want to hold the bauble to use with DRC, right? That is one possibility. However, because I'm not, I'm feeling like it's pretty unlikely we actually get to use DRC next turn or play DRC, just because like we're gonna have this island and nothing to do with it. We'd basically have to draw like Spire Bluff, like red source plus Preordain. Then we might play DRC next turn. Because of that, I almost like Bob. Well, I guess because this Preordain is really committed to digging for lands, bobbling them gives us less info. But often, if you have like Preordain plus Bobble, it's nice to bobble the opponent and see if you get lucky and get some info, because then it can influence how you Preordain turn 1. So like especially if we had a second land in hand, say this DRC was actually just a second land, right? Like bobble the opponent and then Preordain potentially makes our Preordain a lot better, because we could see a Grief, right? We could see a Tron land. It totally impacts how we would resolve Preordain. But because we're digging for that second land, the Preordain is a little bit more narrow in its function. So we're pretty likely to bottom any spell unless we see like if we see land plus spell, we might want to top or we might want to top bottom, so the bauble could help us inform that decision. But if we see 2 spells, they're just both going to the bottom no matter what, because we need that second land. So I think overall I'd probably bauble first, but there is an argument to keeping the bauble for DRC. That's a generally a reasonable thought to have, just not in this situation. I think we're probably going to counterspell next turn, so I'd rather just get the bauble going, cycled.
here I'm digging for that red source. Couldn't find it, so I think I probably bobble here. even
Okay,
though I'd
well,
like to save it for the
if we,
DRC.
yeah, and you say you want
I
to
feel
save it
like
for
we
the
need to dig for
DRC.
that red source.
I agree. You need to dig for the red source. So Lorien
So
revealed.
here we see Lorien, so immediately I think maybe it's Rhinos.
I like that you're trying to guess what their deck is right away. Whenever you get any info, you should always be thinking to yourself what their deck is.
Found my red source.
Okay. Well, maybe we will play DRC on turn two. I mean, at this point, I think we definitely should play DRC on turn two. If we think they're on rhinos, which it seems all indications are they are playing rhinos here.
So here I could play DRC and consider end of turn, or I could save mana for counter spell. I figure since we already have two types in the graveyard, there's a decent chance to get Delirium. So I think we need to establish some pressure. So I play DRC here.
I like this play here with the consider. Um, the nice thing is yes, we have artifact and sorcery, so all we need is land or a creature, and we have two looks with the consider. We're already like pretty incentivized to put
I also
cards
think
into our graveyard
that
because of
if it's
Murktide,
a
so
Bowmaster deck, I can probably try to get rid of the Consider to avoid the ping. So they play a Watery Grave, so I presume it's blue-black control.
yeah. So the Watery Grave changes things. Obviously, Rhinos doesn't play Watery Grave. I think there's an argument now because we know it's blue-black control, and you just called out Bowmaster. If they go land pass, it does make things a little bit awkward for us. It's not horrible, to be honest, because we do have
They play Bowmaster.
so depending on our hand, right? Like if we didn't have this third land, after they got the Watery Grave, you might have wanted to consider. But because we have this third land, if they just play land number two and pass, we can untap and then play our land and hold up counterspell plus consider, which is a pretty good turn. So we're not like rushed into playing the consider into the bowmaster. Like we don't have to end step this consider here, but if we didn't have this next land, maybe we want to consider before they untap and get land number two, just to avoid the risk of bowmaster kind of paralyzing us with this consider and then maybe tapping us out of counter spell in the future turns. But yeah, because we have land number three, I think it's okay to wait,
On their turn, which helped me
and we should
try to
definitely
get rid of
consider in
Consider.
response. All right, do we? Nice. Okay. So obviously put that in a graveyard because then we're going to have 4 card types. This counterspell is interesting though. We bin the counterspell. I think that's reasonable, though counterspell does tend to be on the stronger side against this archetype. Oh, and drawing Blood Moon is actually really interesting. I'm curious to see how you evaluate that.
So here we have a decision. Should we play Murktide or just wait with counter spell up?
So do we consider Blood Moon at all? Because right now Blood Moon takes them off of a color, and I don't think they actually have that many swamps in their deck. They have a couple islands, but they don't have many swamps. We have Blood Moon this turn, and then next turn we could like have Bolt plus Murktide. This could take them off of island to island. It could take them off of black mana. This Blood Moon actually seems pretty good here, but its window will be pretty short because if they just have a fetch in play in the future turn, then they can just get their basic, and it gets worse. So to me, Blood Moon is the card I'd probably jam. I think that at this point they would have to fawn a Blood Moon, and they can't even do anything bad in response because they can't even like they can't play One Ring
I
next turn,
believe I
which is the
placed
scariest
Murktide
card.
here.
And also, not to mention, you took away Delirium from your DRC, which was actually pretty good here. So there's a chance that they might have tried to like push the
The
DRC next
thinking
turn
was
or
if they
edict the
have Children's
DRC.
Edict, we had the DRC to save us. They wouldn't have enough mana to both play another Bowmasters to ping the DRC and play Edict, so we only get punished by exactly Fatal Push and Children's Edict. And I wanted to pressure them, and since they were tapped, they couldn't counter the Murktide, so I went for it.
I see your logic. They do have subtlety in their deck, right? They play like 4 subtlety, 4 force negation. Oh man, are they gonna have it exactly? That's a bummer.
And got immediately punished because he had exactly Fatal Push and
uh,
Edict.
we did sort of get punished here, but also, and I think it's okay to bolt the Bowmaster
So now I
here,
feel
but
like we're way too far behind. We have no proactive plays. We draw Spire Bluff Canal, so pretty much tilted
so
I
if we
played
had
the
cast Blood Moon
Blood
last
Moon.
turn, they would have had to have Fawn. But they do have
It
Fawn, so they would have
gets
fawned the Blood Moon
lots
last
of
turn.
negations, but
But
even
then after
then, I'm
drawing
not
a
sure if
Spire
it was
Bluff, we could
correct to
have
play the Blood
known
Moon.
to
Probably
wait on
not,
Murktide
because
one turn and
we
protect our
could have
Murktide
just
with
played
Counterspell. So we could have protected our Murktide with Counterspell because we draw Spire Bluff, just like pass, bolt the Bowmaster or something, and then next turn Murktide plus Counterspell. On the other hand, they have their own counterspells, obviously, so
uh,
they might have just counterspelled us, negating the
ring
counter.
turn 4, and I wouldn't have any option available. I probably should have just saved Counterspell.
Also, the Blood Moon that turn was a lot worse, right? Because we One Ring on 4 is pretty scary. So I'd much rather play Blood Moon the turn before. I guess if we play Blood Moon and it resolves, then
Draw another Spire Bluff, and
if Blood
it's
Moon
pretty much
resolves, we
over.
can't really play Murktide and hold up Counterspell, but we could just try to wait and Counterspell their One Ring.
I feel like I'm too far behind to let the Charm resolve.
Yeah,
I
I
pretty
think I
much
agree
think I have to
here.
Counterspell and pray for Expressive Iteration or something.
Okay, well that's game over.
They play the ring, and
Then they play Shieldred. Yep, game over. All right, game 2. So that game, the only thing I would have done differently is I would have probably jammed the Blood Moon on the turn you didn't. When you jam the Blood Moon, they have to have Fawn. If they don't, they're in really bad shape because they're locked out of black mana, and they actually don't have that many swamps in their deck. They're also locked out of double blue unless they find another Lorien revealed or an island, which I think they have a couple islands and a couple more, 4 Lorien revealeds total, so 3 left. So they had some outs, but really you're putting them on mostly the One Ring plus their pitch spells, and then from there you can decide how you want to play it. But you could probably play it where like you could jam Murktide right away, and then if you untap, you have Counterspell up for their One Ring for the rest of the game. Even if they hit One Ring and they play it with a Murktide in play, it's pretty brutal for them because if they're going to be taking a lot of damage and they actually don't have that many cards that are live for them to draw off the One Ring with Blood Moon in play. So we could have gotten Blood Moon down. Then we could have, if they had the Fawn that turn, which they might have already had the Fawn or they might have drawn it, so we don't know. They would have had to Fawn. And then we next turn can like play Spire Bluff, Bolt, Bowmaster, pass with Counterspell up. And the next turn after that play Murktide with Counterspell up. To me that sounds better. It might have just ended up being the same result. And otherwise, I like how you played that game. All right, let's get into game two.
So game two, I removed Ragavan, Blood Moon, a Bolt, and added Anno, Stern Scolding, Spell Pierce, Narset, Dispute. I think that's it.
All right. Your volume got a little bit
So
quieter.
let's play again since we lost the first one.
Let me turn it up. So when it comes to your sideboarding, you cut Ragavan because of Bowmaster, but I'm not sure I really agree with that. And you also kept in 5 removal spells, which I'm not in love with. They don't have a ton of targets for removal. They might have Shieldred in their deck still, but I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to cut it. They have the Murktides, but really it's better to counter the Murktides because they could easily just be greater than 6/6s. Like the games can get grindy, and so you have like your subtleties in and your counters to answer Murktide. I don't think Heat's the most reliable answer. So really the Heats aren't going to trade very well, and Ragavan on the play doesn't risk Bowmaster, so it's still pretty good. I'd probably keep in at least 3 copies, maybe even 4, because the card is just going to trade with their removal, 1 for 1, or maybe be really good. Their deck can be kind of clunky. Like if they keep a hand that doesn't have a fatal push and you play Ragavan turn 1, they're in a lot of trouble. On the draw, we can reevaluate that if we get to game 3, because obviously Ragavan does get a little bit worse, but based on the
So let's
general
play
construction of
again
their
since
deck,
we
they don't
lost the
play to
first
the
one.
board too much besides Bowmaster, so I don't hate Ragavan. Like against Bowmaster decks, Ragavan I think is still fine when it's not like Scam or Yawgmoth where they're just playing to the board a ton and then Ragavan just feels like it's never ever connecting. But this hand is great.
Okay, Mulligan to 5, always good.
They mulligan, we keep, and I like
Turn 1,
playing.
I decided I would try to bait Bowmasters. No, I think it's
So I
too
like
late.
playing DRC here. The reason being is that first of all, I mean cantrips are good, but they're better when you get to surveil with DRC. Second, when you cast a preordain, it's actually better when you have drawn more cards, right? Like you have a better idea of what you're looking for. Like say you draw a counter, then you might, or say like you play DRC and they push it right away. Now you're preordaining for a threat. But say the DRC is going to survive, maybe you just want more counters, right? So actually delaying your cantrips when you have other plays to make can be beneficial. And they can't really punish this DRC on turn 1 very much. Like if we're on the draw, definitely don't play the DRC. They could just have Bowmaster and really punish us. Then I would preordain, but because we're on the play, get the DRC down. Also, the upside is huge. We get to start presenting a clock. If their hand was like Land Cycler into Bowmaster, we just get to, like preordain next turn, hold up Stern Scolding the Bowmaster, and go nuts with this DRC. So I would definitely have gotten it down. And yeah, we have the choice. Like, do we want this Murktide? Probably,
Which one
but
lost?
it's hard to say because the game is just starting. It becomes more clear later in the game, is my point.
So here I tried to bait the Bowmasters.
And you
But
say
because
bait the
it's very
Bowmasters.
complex, I can always consider
It's.
and try to survey with DRC.
I see what you're saying about bait, but I think you're
If he fatal
worrying a
pushes,
little bit too much about getting them,
I
right?
will have to
Because
let
like they could just
Bowmasters
have
do
fatal
everything.
push.
Fine.
They
Then
could
we can
just.
consider.
So now we consider in
Sure.
response. That's fine. We do have a bolt if they jam Bowmasters. I would yeah, that's tough. I'm pretty happy with spell snare there
Let's see
because
here.
it answers counterspell, which would push through our Murktide potentially. But I do see we want to fill up the yard for Murktide in the first place, right?
Okay, so now we have a decision to make. Do we jam Murktide into Counterspell and uh, Shelter Zigged, or just wait?
So in my opinion, this is a pretty. Hmm, let's think about this. So it feels pretty likely that if we play Murktide here, it's not surviving, right? They could have the Edict, like you said, or they could have Counterspell, like you said. But the question is, if it's Counterspell, what's our plan going forward? Like if we pass back, we have the Stern Scolding for Bowmaster, which is nice, but we have, even if we play Murktide, we have Stern Scolding up for Bowmaster anyways. And if they counterspell our Murktide, then we have Iteration next turn, which is pretty nice. If we just pass, we're probably wasting our mana here. We might Stern Scolding a Bowmaster, but otherwise 2 mana is going wasted. And realistically, it's probably going to be like they're going to pass back to us with mana again the next turn, and this Murktide's not very likely to survive. So I think I'd play the Murktide here. Obviously, I think it's pretty likely to eat a counter or something,
I decide to wait since
but
I have lands.
we
I
don't really
can
want our iteration to get countered
jam
either.
Iteration into counters.
Curious what other people think, though. I might be wrong on that. It also just feels like it gets harder to get pick fights later in the game, or to like put
Okay,
pressure on because then they can have like the One Ring or something.
so I already have 4 lands.
This kind of works out really nicely because they Bowmaster us. We can Stern Scolding, and now we can play the Murktide without being afraid of at least the counters.
I think he went
And they
for
even Fawn.
Force of Negation.
So I guess now there's a question of, are we supposed to bolt the Bowmaster? My answer is no. I would let them get the extra trigger. I think that's fine. They can have a 2/2. No, I would play the Murktide here while they're tapped out for
So I
sure.
decide to
Especially because they only have
go
2
to the
cards, so
Master
even if they have the One Ring,
and
they
deny him
need to have a
the
land with it.
trigger.
The other side of the coin, I guess, is
Decide to play the DRC to keep the pressure.
yeah. The flip side of the coin is if you find counterspell off the preordain, maybe you do want to wait on
Yeah,
the
so put
Murktide.
in here.
But again, like then
Now
their
I have lands.
counterspells
Let's
become
go to
live,
Murktide.
and you might just trade counterspell for counterspell. So counterspell's not that
Maybe
great at
he
protecting
waste a
Murktide.
Shield's Edict to kill my DRC and
So this sort of did work out fine for us. Them attacking here,
so we
I'm not
call
sure
off
what that
the token of the
says. They
Murktide
might
to
have
Bowmaster
Nihil Spellbomb, it
kill
feels
my
like.
DRC.
This does feel like a Nihil Spellbomb. Another reason to
So
jam
he
Murktide,
decide to play
I
the
guess,
Murktide.
is they could have Graveyard Hate, right? Oh, they. I don't know what they have then. That's weird.
So now there's another decision. Should I keep the 4 mana to keep a subtlety, a possibility, or should I iteration to bait a counter spell and play Murktide afterwards?
So your question is, do you play hold up subtlety or play Murktide? I'm pretty sure you play Murktide here, just because I don't think there's a lot of actual subtlety targets right now. Their Murktide would be a 5/5. Uh, Iteration is interesting because it could bid out a counter from them. Oh, I and why did we exile the land there when we could have exiled Murktide and played it and then had another Murktide plus another iteration in hand? I definitely would do
So
that
he
there.
has
Like we don't need this
Fawn
fifth land
and
for anything. I mean, 4 lands is plenty enough to operate off of for
so
the
here I
iteration.
exile the Murktide and play the Murktide instead.
And then we shock.
Here I thought he didn't have a counter spell because he didn't counter the iteration, but
Yeah, and I think it's
he
fair to say
also
they don't have a
counters the
counter
Murktide.
spell. But they do. Okay, they just didn't want to counter iteration. Well, now we got. I mean, we got very punished for not not drawing or playing the Murktide from exile, right? We could just still have a Murktide in hand.
Double preordain. Fatal touch. So he tapped out, so I can pretty much freely expect
So we can
iteration
play
without
iteration
anything
here, but we are a little bit more afraid of them having
attacking.
Murktide at this point, or they could have One Ring. I like Annul to hand to at least cover our bases on the One
Not
Ring.
sure if I should have gotten Force of Negation or Annul here, but I got Annul.
No, I think taking Annul is pretty fine. I mean, it feels like they're somewhat likely to have
And now play GRC.
a One Ring maybe, and Annul answers that for when they draw their fourth land. But I guess so does Pierce, so you could take Fawn, I guess. The subtlety covers us versus Murktide. And again, they attack. Oh, they just have another Bowmaster, right? Bowmaster would put one damage on
Which
Dragon Red
was
Channeler and
the
make it a
bottom,
2/2. Yeah, they just have another Bowmaster here.
which turns
Yeah,
out
I
to be
forgot how that
better
worked. So if
because
they
the
attack with a 1/1 into a 3/3,
Bowmaster
Bowmaster
didn't
makes it a
would have
trade.
killed my DRC. I fetch again.
I don't think we need to fetch there on end step, by the way. We should probably hold up Spell Pierce and then just like fetch an upkeep if you want to fetch. Small thing, but like sometimes be very careful about fetching and like that you effectively don't have a land while the fetch is on the stack so they can
I'm just
respond.
hoping I
Like there have
can
been times where I had 2 mana
subtlety
and my opponent was like representing a subtlety or solitude or something.
shielded
And if I
the land
fetch, then they
that
can just cast
turn.
solitude and I only have 1 mana at the moment because my fetch is resolving. So
So
keep that
try
in
to
mind.
flash subtlety,
Subtlety here seems fine because
counter spell, and force of
we do
negation
need
back.
to be careful about losing the
And
race.
concedes, if I recall correctly.
I think Counterspell top is fine also. Basically, they have like one turn to draw Murktide. Alright, but we win that game. Nice. Alright, game 3.
3. For some reason I trimmed on removal and put Ragavan back.
Oh, so you put Ragavan
Not
back
sure
in for game 3 on the
what was I
draw.
thinking, but anyway. This time we're on the draw, game 3.
I probably wouldn't have all 4 Ragavan back in game 3 on the draw, but
I kept the hand.
I do like cutting the removal, so maybe you just have to keep Ragavan in. I don't think it's that bad on the draw because of the reason I said earlier. They just, besides Bowmaster, Ragavan's actually fine against them.
So he preordained.
Yeah, this hand was a keep, by the way. Even though double
So
Murktide is not
here I probably
ideal, having all the
preordain.
counters and the iteration is good,
Try to find more
and
lands.
drawing preordain is great. We should definitely top bobble, right? Because we want to fill our graveyard,
I decide
so it's
to
just like a free card in the
get the
yard.
bubble since it's pretty much a free draw and I
Yep.
want to get my card draw before they have Bowmasters in play. And since I have a scolding, even if they flash in the upkeep, I can scold in it.
Yep, I agree. So they shuffle away the Bowmaster.
So I get another bauble, no third land.
We do definitely want that third land. Oh.
Still no third land. Again, I decided I might as well just play bobble to see if I can find that third land and try to get rid of my card draw before he has Bowmasters in play. I knew he had Bowmasters.
No, we don't know they have Bowmasters because they use Lorien Revealed to shuffle after the bobble. Make sure you keep track of that because I've tricked myself a couple times when I bobble them and then they fetch after or shuffle after before they draw the card that we thought they were drawing. The game I played against Four Color, where I thought they had Otawara the whole game and then they just didn't. So
Again, no lands.
at this point,
I
I
decide
think we
to
need to cast
iteration, even
Iteration.
if I
We
know
do
it's
have the
getting
Cast
countered
into the Fire
because
also.
I would have had to discard anyway.
They fluster. We have Cast into the Fire if they do
I
stick the
was,
One
I
Ring, and if
was
the iteration, if they let it resolve,
frustrated because of the mana screw, but
it's very good. Yeah, the Mana Screw is a bummer here.
anyways. I decide to discard a Murktide.
I agree, discarding a Murktide makes sense. Brutal. They have the One Ring.
Okay, so he plays a ring.
So we have this Cast into the Fire, which could
Can't do anything about it.
mitigate the damage. And if we hit a land drop, then we have a null up. Okay. So yeah, let's just get this ring out of the.
From here I decide to
I mean, if they have Force
cast
and
into the
Negation, they
fire
have
to
Force and
deny him more
Negation.
draws.
But it's better to make them have Force and Negation than like let them untap and draw more cards. And now I kind of feel like we're in okay shape. Not great shape, but okay shape.
Find my fourth land.
And Steam Vents is great here because we don't have to iteration now. We can just pass back with a bunch of counters up. End step, I don't even hate flashing and subtlety if they do nothing on their turn. I think we should Stern Scolding this, yeah.
Not sure if I should have
Subtlety feels too
countered
greedy,
that Bowmasters.
and I think you probably
Might
want to
have been
counter
correct
it.
to
You,
just
just
save the
because
mana
Stern
to
Scolding has so
subtlety.
few targets, you might as well just Stern Scolding the Bowmasters. Letting it resolve is like your Stern Scolding is going to rot away in your hand. It's basically specifically in your deck to counter Bowmasters. If it was like counter spell, maybe you let the Bowmasters resolve, right?
Now he starts missing land drops,
So
but
if
he
they're
still
missing
has
land
7
drops,
cards to my
maybe
5.
we should just not do anything. Because if we do something, they can play their counter spells and stuff.
So I decide to wait.
Now they could just end up having another Bowmaster or something. Charm? I would not. I am not sure I would counterspell the Archmage's Charm here. We do have the Annul for another One Ring, but
So here he plays his Murktide.
yeah, if they have something like Murktide, it's really bad. So what are we gonna do? Subtlety? Are we going to subtlety this? The problem is, or the question is, our Murktide can answer theirs, but it's risky because if they can answer our Murktide, then we don't have any answers to theirs. So I don't
I'm
hate subtlety
forced
pitching a
to
null.
flash subtlety, pitching the Annul.
And now we can iterate plus have that Murktide up.
So here iteration to try and find another counter, which I find. and then I have to play the Murktide. So I'm not sure why he played Shoulders Edict into my exiled spell Pierced.
Yeah, I'm not sure
I
why
guess it
either. They
was
do have a
just
lot of gas in hand, though.
he just wanted me to tap out
Yeah, that's my guess as well, as he has
so he
something
could play
here
Ring,
that's
I
gonna be
guess.
punishing. Or he's just up so many cards that he's okay discarding a card to pressure you, but yeah, he's trying to protect
I
his
still
One
think
Ring.
it was correct to spell Pierce that
Yeah, because if you don't
Shoulders
spell
Edict,
pierce
even
it,
if I
they
know
don't
he
have
was
to play the
baiting me
One Ring.
because there was simply no way that I could afford to lose at Murktide. I'd have absolutely no way to win the game, so I just had to risk it and try to finish him with 2 attacks and hopefully some chip damage from the ring.
Yeah, I exactly agree here.
So here I fetch to try to improve the odds of finding playable cards. And I get a
So
Pierce.
we get Pierce. I mean, Pierce might be playable. If they go for something, we counter and they counter back. Pierce could be live. Chances are they would have done that beforehand, though, so. Alright, I mean.
Now I start to count. He has a fetch. He'll take 2 damage from the ring. So he's only 1 attack away.
Yeah, we're close here. This
So
is close. They're gonna have 11 cards, but their deck is pretty clunky. And they don't
here I
necessarily do the
hope he
greatest with
tries to play a
onboard
Sheoldred
threats.
because I know he doesn't have enough mana, so he doesn't have Force of Negation because it's on his turn.
Oh, this is
And
great.
that's exactly what happens. I counter spell, he counter spells back, and I spell Pierce.
Look at that. Nice job. Winner, winner. Yeah, and that's how you do it. I think you played this game great. I really do. Um, I'm trying to think back. So I don't love the counterspell on the Archmage's Charm still, but on the other hand, like, yeah, I don't love that. Yeah, I think you just let it resolve normally, and if they want to, like, if they draw up from 7 to 9 or to 8 and draw to 9, so then they play a land and they're still at 8 cards, right? So they have to play a spell, which we can then counterspell that spell. I think that seems better to me than counterspelling the Archmage's Charm. Because then they're tapping low and it gives us a chance to resolve our Murktide iteration, have a null up, all those plays. I think that's how I would try to sequence the game to force them to use similar to a Murktide mirror, like using your mana on your own turn as or be the first one to blink is not great when your opponent has all their mana up and a bunch of cards in hand, because normally your stuff will get countered and then they're gonna untap on their turn and punish you for being low on mana. So counterspelling there didn't really do much when the Archmage's Charm was gonna force them to play a spell on their turn or go to discard. And if they go to discard, then it's like Archmage's Charm is like draw 2, discard 1. I mean, that's not. That's okay. That's totally fine. But otherwise, I thought you played that game great. Thank you for sharing these VODs, and I hope that my feedback was helpful. See you guys.